Moore Motley, SC-MP, Prime Minister. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Kevin Greenidge, Chairman of the Barbados Private Sector Association, Dr. Tricia Tanis, distinguished past presidents of the Barbados Chamber, BCCI Executive and Council members, BCCI Executive Director, Mrs. Misha Loban-Clark, CEOs and Executive Directors of private sector organizations, heads of government agencies and other statutory bodies, members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Barbados Chamber of Commerce's annual Prime Minister's Luncheon under the theme of the Mission Economy. Thank you all for joining us today to further explore the transformative impact that a mission economy can have on a country in the face of ongoing local and global economic, environmental, climatic, and health and well-being challenges, not to mention the specter of war in several countries around the globe. To deal with such challenges, Professor Mariana Mazzucato from the University College London's Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose proposes a mission-oriented approach whereby missions are used to solve complex challenges by harnessing multi-sectoral participation to execute a series of projects designed to reach the mission objectives. In May 2023, the social partners, in collaboration with Professor Mazzucato, launched 6 missions for Barbados to address these challenges in order to create a sustainable, empowered, equitable, healthy, enfranchised and resilient society for all of us. And in case you haven't tattooed these missions on your forearm as yet, Barbados' 6 missions are as follows. Sustainable. Become a clean and beautiful large ocean state, championing sustainable development locally and globally, with the goal of all domestic activities becoming 100% sustainable by 2035. Empowered. Transform Barbados into a country of active, involved citizens. All Barbadians will feel empowered and engaged in the social, economic, and cultural development of the country as confident, creative, compassionate, and entrepreneurial citizens. 3, equitable. Ensure that every Barbadian has equitable and reliable access to clean water and nutritious food that is affordable. 4, healthy. Create a society that prioritizes wellness and happiness and improve public health and safety, leading to a 50% reduction in new cases of non-communicable diseases and a 50% reduction in crime. 5, enfranchised. Empower and enfranchise all Barbadian workers and families by creating opportunities for ownership and wealth creation that enable Barbadians to take better care of themselves and each other and reduce the rate of poverty by 50%. And 6, resilient. Transform Barbados to be a high-functioning, resilient society with seamless access to services and meaningful digital inclusion for all Barbadians. You may have recognized by now that these missions encompass the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and are multi-sectoral in nature and require the collaboration and participation of all stakeholders in this country to achieve them, from the social partners right through to individual citizens. In October this year, the BCCI signed on to the United Nations Global Compact, which is a powerful initiative aimed at encouraging businesses and firms worldwide to adopt sustainable and socially responsible policies. Its 10 principles uphold human rights, ensure environmental responsibility, and fight against corruption in all its forms. The BCCI is committed to promoting the 10 principles and helping build the capacity of our membership to address critical corporate sustainability challenges by ensuring a widespread adoption of responsible business practices within our community. Pulling all the stakeholders together is no mean feat, yet imperative for the achievement of the missions and the sustainability and growth of our society. In addition, significant investment is likely needed in research and development, project planning, procurement, and project execution. Today, we are privileged to have our Prime Minister deliver the feature address on leveraging the social partners to achieve mission economy objectives. In closing, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for your unwavering commitment to exploring the vital aspects of a mission economy. As we embark on this transformative initiative, guided by the 6 missions set forth for Barbados, let us remember that these objectives not only align with our national aspirations, but also resonate with the global pursuit of sustainability and well-being. The collaborative efforts of the social partnership, the support of our Prime Minister and the government, as well as the engagement of all stakeholders, underscore the significance of our collective mission. By integrating the Sustainable Development Goals and upholding the principles of the United Nations Global Compact, we demonstrate a shared commitment to creating positive change and building a future that is sustainable, equitable, and resilient. As we move forward, let us remain committed to fostering empowerment, equity, health, enfranchisement, and resilience in our society. The Chamber of Commerce is honored to be part of this transformative journey, and we look forward to the continued collaboration and shared success that will shape a prosperous and sustainable future for Barbados. At this point, I'd like to introduce the Honourable Kirk Humphrey, MP, Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, who will address us briefly on the One Family Programme and the 1000 Family Initiative. Minister Humphrey.
Thank you very much. Honourable Prime Minister, Senior Minister, other Ministers of Government, President Clark, other members of the Chamber, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen all. It is my pleasure to speak very briefly on an initiative we're doing in the ministry and for the government of Barbados that we refer to as the One Family Initiative, or as you may have heard us speak about it in the press, the 1000 Family Program, where we're trying to help the 1,000 most vulnerable families. When I sat there just now, I thought of what I would say. I had notes in my head, but what came to my mind really was that as a boy, PM, I used to take out sheep for a guy who lived across the street. And I would take them out on mornings and bring them back in on evenings. And one Easter, he just showed up at my house and gave me a kite. I was not expecting the kite, but I must tell you, it felt very good to receive a kite. Living where I lived in the Pine, a few blocks down, there was Alamac, used to sell oranges. At Christmas, we knew you could get oranges. Across the street from there was Banks Breweries. Money or not, you go down by Banks, you were guaranteed to walk away with a plus, or a coconut cooler, or another drink of some kind. Above where I lived was Vitafoam, and they would just hire people. Businesses understood that they also had to play a role in helping us all out. So I learned very early that it felt good to receive. But of course, as I got older and found myself in a position where I could give a little, I also realized it feels very good to be able to give. And those two values might be known to me, but I'm pretty sure they're known to all in this room. We were raised that way, that we have determined a long time ago that we must help those who are not necessarily in a position to help themselves. It's just the DNA of who we are as Barbadians. Therefore, this initiative that we are doing now comes at a very time when we actually need to do it the most. The program that we are piloting is called the 1000 Family Initiative, whereby we're helping 1,000 most vulnerable families. This is about 3,000, 4,000 families. And each of these families require different things. And we're taking this opportunity to ask for support in order to be able to give these families mentorship where they need it, to give financial donations where they need it. We have the account number here somewhere. I will share it with Mr. Clark. To be able to help them get through what essentially is a difficult period, but what I know with the collective support of all of us that we will definitely be able to get through. We have, as a government, we've gone through this entire process. We've selected the families, and we did so in a scientific way, which we have shared. I believe we shared it with you, Mr. Clark, for sharing, whereby it was not a political process. We actually selected the family based on where they stood on their poverty index, so that you know the families that you are supporting are definitely families who are going to be in need. And therefore, we'll be working with these families over the course of the next 2 years to be able to break the cycle of poverty, because what we've done is these sporadic interventions that haven't really worked. And we know that we need to be able to spend time and resources with these families. So I'm just using this opportunity to share with you that over the next few weeks, you're going to see a lot more advertisements, a lot more ads, a lot more requests asking for support for these families, and we trust that you will be able to help us do so. The government has made a commitment to be able to move people out of poverty. And so far, if you look at our estimates, this is easily to verify. This government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Motley, has spent the most money of any government in terms of the social services sector. And in fact, as I speak now, we just completed our estimates, or the first phase of it, where again, we are committing the most money that any government has ever committed toward alleviating poverty in this Barbados. And that's a fact. And so we are putting our money where our mouth is too. And all I'm asking for is a little support for us to be able to advance this cause and to make Barbados the kind of place that we know it has always been, a beautiful place, a safe place, a place where we could continue to do business and where every single child in this country could live out the true meaning of what it is to be a Barbadian. So we're asking for your support in this process. That's all I will share. Have a wonderful Christmas, and thank you all very much. Thank you.
Appropriate at this time of the year, but also appropriate all through the year. So thanks, President Jimmy and Minister Humphrey, for your comments, remarks, and for sharing on that project. President Jimmy shared with us the 6, I call them pillars, of Mission Barbados. I think all of us should become familiar with them. Don't just hear them, but seek to read. There's some supporting information relating to it that we within the business community should spend some time understanding or trying to figure out how we can play our part individually and in terms of individual companies and also collectively as a chamber. Mr. Humphrey, when you started and you spoke, it took me back to childhood. And the Barbados, I nearly said I knew. Probably I knew because we have actually shifted from that Barbados. And that is a Barbados where the community actually took on the responsibility for those within the community. And we've moved away from that, and basically your ask is, let's get back there, starting with those that need it most, right? I'm aware that there are groups in Barbados, whether it's Optimists, Rotary, different non-governmental organizations that are doing a lot of work and trying to help families. Currently involved in a program. What we realize is that handouts really doesn't work. We need a sustainable program. And the program that I'm involved with, we actually take families in partnership with the welfare, and we don't publicize it. Over the last 2 years, we took 10 families. The 10 families actually accounted for 45 persons. And this year, we are taking 11 families through that program that account for 65 people. And through that program, we actually were able to actually reunite a father with his 3 sons, where the kids had to go into care simply because the father couldn't adequately provide it. And using contacts within the business community, we actually coordinated with business houses that actually put the funds in to rebuild the house and provided the furniture and everything. Again, partnering with the welfare department, right? So there are people doing that, and I think I share that not for personal gain, but just think about if every company in this room can do that within, this island is small, and I think we can tackle it if we actually put our money to the task, commit on a sustainable way to actually helping families in the community. So thank you for that, and I encourage you all to get on board. So we're now at the point where I know a lot of you turn up here to hear our Prime Minister, and I hope that during the Q&A session, you will have some interesting questions for her. But it is my distinct distinct pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, the Honorable Mia Amor-Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon to all of you. After listening to Kirk, I definitely know it's the season to be jolly, and it's also the season to give. The only problem is that in giving, we need to ensure that we're building as well. And I start from this point because Paul just said it. This is a small country. And there is much within our control, but there's also a lot that is not within our control. And I want this afternoon to have a conversation with you because it is important that we take stock and commit ourselves to move again. We've done well, and don't get me wrong, we've done well over the last 5 years. We have managed to be able to stabilize our economy, to put behind us the threat to our dollar. We have managed to bring back services for the most part. They are now suffering from some weariness, and the government is refocusing on all of them in every respect, from transport to sanitation to water, the basic services. We're putting mechanisms in place to be able to allow us to deal with grievances formally, both that are appropriate to those who do not know how to use this and those who know how to use this. In other words, both analog and digital. We have overcome a horrific period of almost 3 years between pandemic and natural disaster. 9 days of the port, 7 days of the port being shut down and 9 days of the airport being shut down because of the ashfall in St. Vincent. And then, of course, the freak storm and Hurricane Elsa, that all in rapid succession between April and July, literally within a 12-week period, put us on our backs for a bit. And in spite of all of that, we are where we are. We are not at the destination, however. And doing well is to give us the comfort and courage that we have the capacity and we have the, I hope still, the commitment. The difficulty is that when you start to spread out stabilization and transformation, you then get, like with every other human being, fatigue. And people say, wait, you're coming again? Oh, Lord, that now? You mean this now? And that's exactly where the country is. But if we stop now, it's almost, the metaphor is powerful. Just after 3 o'clock this morning, our time, the world reached an agreement. And for all 193 countries to reach an agreement, it meant that no one got exactly what they wanted. True? Because that's just not possible, because we are made differently, we're constructed differently, we earn differently. But what we did was to accept that there was a common space in which all of us could agree. And for the first time ever, we have now an agreement to be able to transition out of fossil fuels. Now, there are still many steps. And we were very clear to instruct our delegation, and I want to commend Minister Monroe Knight and Professor Passad and Ricardo Marshall and Karima Dega and Minister Ford and his PS and all of the others who are still there trying to settle, they've now finished, who were there trying to help us reach this point. But without access to finance, without access to technology, without access to the plant and equipment, we have no capacity to meet commitments. So as good as we feel, and as historic as the occasion was, reversing centuries of an approach, there is much still to be done. And as we were taught, there is many a slip between cup and lip. I use this example, but equally, I contrast it with the other example that is more immediate. Cabinet met today as opposed to tomorrow. And why? Because tomorrow I have to be in St. Vincent for the day because of the talks between Guyana and Venezuela. There is no more sinister threat to our immediate existence in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean and in coastal Latin America than what is transparent between those two countries. And made more so because our consciousness has been infused with the presence of war, from the Ukraine and Russian war to the war in Africa, across many different territories, to the war in the Middle East. And the one thing that we have said in this region is that we don't want what? To lose the region as a zone of peace. I contrast these two things because as one gives us optimism, one robs us of optimism. And what is required of us more than anything else is to accept that there are things that we can do and there are things that we have to be prepared to deal with the consequences because we cannot control some of those other things. And the missions, quite frankly, have been structured to be able to accommodate that. Now I can use Jimmy's language and the language of this book, and if you don't have it, please get a copy of it, for the mission-oriented strategies, and I can be very proper and read it, or I can do what I've been doing recently, which is to break it down in Beijing. And break it down in Beijing. Because at the end of the day, it is not only about what we commit to do here, but it is what we commit to do here. And it therefore was not by accident that I asked that Kirk be given the opportunity to share, because I can come and do like the governor and talk to you about growth. But inclusive growth is what is needed. Because if we simply grow and we're not carrying the people at the bottom, then the spectacle that has befallen many of our Caribbean neighbors and which has started to befall us in terms of social implosion and prevalence of violence and guns can become more of our reality. And if anybody in here has the capacity to help us turn the corner to ensure that our growth is inclusive, who is it? The people in this room. But there's one problem. You have to turn up. And you have to turn up equally for investment. The country has many, many, many initiatives before us. But in almost every instance, the source of the funds and the nationality of the funds is looking less and less Barbadian and more foreign. And at a time when there's over $14 billion, 14 billion, correct, Governor? Dollars in savings in our accounts in this country, I have to ask the question, what is our hope for our future? And I do so conscious that the missions give us a framework for a win-win. A win-win because the missions provide the pathway for national development. But equally, the people who can sponsor and benefit from national development, if it is to be inclusive growth, must be whom? Bajans. And Bajans, not only those who have a concentration of wealth, but the collective total of Barbadians using their savings, with all due respect, to get a return of more than 0.01%. I'm going to stick on that metaphor because the last time I used the security guard metaphor, others got deeply offended. But the truth is, I'm not sure that we're far different from that when banks are earning more from fees than they are from interest. Look at the loan-to-deposit ratio. So let's have some real talk. The missions tell us, from one, we want the country clean, and we want to protect the environment that we live in, both on land and in the ocean. The government has led the way with the issuance of blue bonds last year, not increasing our debt, but in fact reallocating monies that we were paying in interest that will now go to the establishment of the Barbados Marine Trust that will allow 50 to 60 million US dollars in the next 15 years to be spent to protect our waters. But there's a role for many of you and your businesses in the maritime environment. And there's equally a role for many of you with respect to keeping the country clean, the terrestrial part clean. And the legislation that the Attorney General will bring will see a shift in the burden as to who is responsible for helping to keep the country clean. The government has been doing the lion's share. And even as we speak, we've brought on another 300 people or so to be able to help us over the next month because we have not seen the concomitant uptake on the part of either property owners, commercial or residential, in keeping their lots clean. Now, at the end of the day, when you do that, what are you doing? You're spending money. And you're spending money in the pockets of whom? How many people in this room clean bush? Very few. So where's the money going to go? The most that you might benefit from in this room is likely to be the rental of equipment. But what it does is to ensure that people are doing it. But we will complain about dengue outbreaks. We'll complain about the rats. But we can't keep a clean environment unless we actually keep a clean environment. Talking about it is not sufficient. And therefore, the question is, how do we attain that? The government believes that ownership is not just a privilege, it is a responsibility. And if you have lots, and if you have buildings, then you have to maintain them. And this government, as I reminded the social partnership on Monday, has done much to put money back in people's pockets. Corporation taxes were as high as 30%. Even with the revision that we have recently announced, we have not yet gone back to double digits. Income tax refunds and income tax rates. Income tax refunds were a thing of the past for years. We started giving back people on a regular basis, and some of you are waiting for some now, and you'll get it soon. What's a fact? But I know that when we came in, some of you were waiting for 4 and 5 years. Okay? The reverse tax credit's the same thing. And the reality is that we expanded the number of people who can have and who benefit under the income tax legislation by keeping more money in their pockets, both at the bottom level, but equally right up to the top by reducing the rates for everybody. Now that came mercifully for many of you before the pandemic. So at the very time when you needed additional cash, you had it. But the time now is not just to have it, the time now is to use it and to invest back in your country, because if you don't invest back in this country, tell me who will. If I take some Mobby and pour it in a glass, and then I take water, I can take a small 250 milliliter bottle of water and pour it in the glass, or I can wash it away with a gallon. If I wash it away with a gallon, the dilution is such that it almost don't taste like Mobby anymore. And this conversation in here today is to give us a wake-up call that investment will come and investment must come. But the investment must come not just from outside Barbados. It must come from within Barbados. And the reality is that there are some bugbears that we need to get over, separate from what the government must do institutionally. The work towards the establishment of the unit trust has started. We are also going to repurpose and restructure the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited so that it becomes more responsive. The country has not had a development bank, and we don't want to invest again in a huge monolithic structure that will see the monies being allocated more to administration and profits rather than facilitated into where it matters most. The GFL has managed a number of funds, but it has had a more passive approach, regrettably, rather than the aggressive approach that we actually need now to partner with many of you in order to be able to give you the necessary financing. But it mustn't only be debt financing. And this is where I'm glad, Mr. Clark, Jimmy, that you have agreed that we can work together, and I hope that the Stock Exchange will work with us. The Ministry of Commerce has started the work on financial literacy. It needs to expand exponentially, not just at the bottom level in communities, but across the country. There are too many companies in this country that continue to rely on debt financing alone without understanding that equity financing and mezzanine financing is absolutely critical in order for us to move forward. Part of the difficulty is, believe you me, and we feel it and face it, is the declining population and therefore the declining number of players, both as investors but also as managers and technical people. And the country has to open up in order to be able to ensure that in the same way we are prepared to accept foreign investment, we need also additional skills to help us manage and to get to the ground, get to the land safely if we are going to move a wide swath of projects over the next few years. The first mission, therefore, with respect to cleanliness, with respect to preservation in the blue and green, is critical. But it doesn't stop there. In tourism, how many hotels are fully green? In manufacturing, how much manufacturing is green? In agriculture, the sustainable practices that are necessary for the reduction of methane is not only the responsibility of large industrial farmers. And the bottom line is that all of these things that undermine a green transition speak to economic activity and speak potentially to growth in this country. Our responsibility is to make sure that as we do it, that it is inclusive and that it is fair and that it is transparent. So that when we speak about the missions, contrary to some who would want in the press to have negative commentary about what is this fancy thing now that them talking about and that the head of the private sector and the heads of the labor movement and government signing, it is about giving us a roadmap that we can sustain and know that it will have prominence in the private sector, prominence among the workers of the country, and prominence among the government, and prominence, we hope, among the financiers in the country, so that you don't have to doubt what matters to us in terms of propelling development. The second one is critical because it affects the first and what I just said about being able to move outside of debt financing. Debt financing is easy if you can get the money from the banks. It's easy because it doesn't require much trust. But if we start moving now to equity financing and even some elements of mezzanine, you're now talking about trust. And regrettably, the historic baggage that we carry stops us from trusting each other sufficiently, and that we believe it is better to be lord of a small plot rather than being a participant in a major plant and infrastructural framework. Eric Williams once told the people of Trinidad early on in his leadership of the country, half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. We have to learn from the credit union movement. In the 1970s, Tom Adams introduced specific fiscal incentives to be able to encourage Barbadians to pool their savings. He understood that it was happening for almost a century, particularly with the, believe it or not, the landship movement, the co-op movement. I heard Paul speak about optimists and Kiwanis and Lions and JCs without understanding that the one movement that's probably older than all of those is the Barbados Landship that was started less than 2 miles from here. But we don't embrace it. And that landship movement led to a whole host of cooperative financial practices that sustained generations of Barbadians, that helped put money for shops to open, that helped put money for farms and farming to be done. And I am saying to you that the mission number 2, which says basically look in the mirror and love who you see, in the words of Errol Barrow, look in the mirror and love who you see. Because when you start to love who you see, you stop being suspicious of others in the way in which you are and stop worrying about who trying to get from you and who ain't trying to get from you without recognizing that the mission is much larger than any one of us. There are very few companies in this country that are at scale. And in fact, part of the difficulty that I have globally is that when people ask me for opportunities in Barbados, they are limited. They're limited. And we have, therefore, to ensure that we do what we can best because we have limited opportunities for expansion. And that is why the CARICOM single market and single economy is so important to us. And that is why I have asked for us to look at stop only measuring GDP alone, as Ryan Strong will tell you, but also to start to measure GNI. Because the export of capital in the rest of the region and in coastal Latin America and Central America and even further afield is absolutely critical. Because you're not going to be able to move to scale. And Paul, you said it best again when you were dealing with how you would like to see what you did to support families replicated across other companies. My cabinet will tell you that I tell them daily, without scale, we have no transformation. And that this notion that we can continue to cross a chasm in small steps. From the days of Owen Arthur, I learned that that was not possible. And that is why I say, do not tire with transformation fatigue. Do not tire. If you want a shoulder to lean on, come and call me. Mine big. But do not tire. Because the country is about to face a world that is very different from the world that we faced in the first 50 years or so of our independence. And whether we like it or not, we had a lost decade with respect to economic performance. The GDP when we became the government of this country was effectively the GDP that we left when Owen Arthur stopped being Prime Minister of this country. That is the straight talk. And then, in the 5 years, if I want to be specific, 5 years and 7 months that we have been the government, almost 3 years, 36 months were taken from us because of a pandemic and natural disasters. That left us with what? 21 months. Where you felt that you could almost have a free hand, to use a cricketing analogy. I feel free to do that in Barbados again now, in this last week. It is truly the season to be jolly. And let me shout out the West Indies players, because we have a way of hitting at them when they're down. We need to salute them with a big shout out from here today. And we all know that we are likely to entertain the entire world within 8 months. So let us get accustomed to victory and hospitality. But suffice it to say that we are at a stage now where we are going to have to be able to examine what we can do and what we cannot do, and what we cannot do well. And looking in that mirror and seeing who is in that mirror and being able to trust somebody that you don't know, but who has cash and who can help you do the projects that you need to do. The law has structured ways of dealing with this. That's what happens in the rest of the globe. But we make it a micro decision and an emotional decision rather than understanding that having confidential information memorandums going to a few people, setting out, this is what I intend to do, these are the returns I expect to get, these are the protective measures that we intend to see in here. Many of you in this room do it for other companies, but we're not doing it for who? For Barbadian companies. And I don't get vexed when they say too much Trinidad companies coming in or too much Jamaican companies coming in, because quite frankly, we should be doing what? Going out. You can't quarrel with somebody for doing the right thing when you are not prepared to do the right thing yourself. And I simply, God knows, Jano, that how much ever I say it will not make it happen. But a few of you in this room need to leave this room and start to have course correction. Because without that course correction, we're not going to finally make the destination and stay at it. And that is why, there are difficult things that you will need some partnerships. Yes, and some will be outside and some will be inside. But we have to be prepared to take risk. And if we don't take risk, the old saying that we learned from a child, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And that is where I want us to be. But as we do all of that, there are two basic things that we need to understand, and that's Mission 3 and Mission 4. Mission 3, you don't have food, you don't have water, tell me how long you're going to last. That's why it's a global public good as well. And the reality is that's why we separate it from climate, because it is too basic and too fundamental to human existence and to national stability and to national security. Bob Marley told us a hungry man is an angry man. And we know that more than anything else. When we have seen instability spark across the world and people take to the streets, 90% of the time, it is because of inability to access food. With respect to nations, what is the Israeli commitment to the Golan Heights? It's water. Ironically, I say that at the very time when the freshwater supply, to the extent that it exists in Gaza, may not exist with saltwater intrusion into the tunnels. But that's another story for another day. The bottom line is that we need to ensure that Barbados boosts its food security, and by committing to having as much production as is humanly possible, because we are not just producing now for local demand, but we are producing for agro-processing as a key industry that the government is embracing with the help of our brothers and sisters in Guyana and Suriname, both the St. Barnabas Agreement and the Broca Pondo Agreement, and also with the discussions that we've had with northern Brazil. And obviously the Venezuela one is at risk now, given where we are with these discussions. The point is that Barbados is competitive because we have how many flights leaving a week to London and to Europe and to North America? So that the logistics framework is there already. We now have, thanks to the Ministry of Industry, and I want to thank the BIDC for it, and many of you are now aware, we have the capacity with the food terminal that we have in Newton to export now to the US product that is produced in that food terminal at Newton, which we never had before. And I hope that within 6 months, we will have our HACCP compliance as well, so that there is no excuse for even the smallest producers in this country not being able to have access to efficient machinery, and yes, Caribbean Export, to work with you to start ensuring that people, especially in our diaspora, are capable of benefiting from some of the things that they miss most when they leave, from our root crops to the stuff that is being done with dehydrated processes to dehydrate materials, which becomes more and more important in the event of a climate crisis or a war, because it means that you can continue to feed our people. And I'm happy that we are concluding discussions with a major Trinidadian entity to be able to establish production capacity, not just in Trinidad, but in Barbados. And we have been working. Last week I met with the head of the World Food Program, because it is not only about using our domestic market or using the agro-processing, but it is also about recognizing that more and more in today's world, you're going to need to be able to have emergency food available to people because of the risk of the climate crisis and now war, and worse than that, the impact of what I call the insidious things that you guys have been talking about more than anybody else now, what will happen, or what is happening, because of the Panama Canal suffering from the impact of the climate crisis, thereby slowing down the number of ships that can move through the canal. Our worst fear is the spread of the war in the Middle East, because if we get the Panama Canal locked down on the left and Suez Canal locked down on the right, what do the people who surround the Atlantic have? Horrors. Because you now have to look at alternative routes, much of which are inhospitable to ships, but apart from anything else, the time delays will be so significant that what you are facing now will look like child's play. And that is why the business model that you were accustomed to in the last decade or two, Jimmy, we spoke about it on Monday, that where you just bring in the parts that you need when you need them, is no longer going to work. The world has moved from the most profitable and lean supply chains to supply chains that must now be resilient, because if it is critical pieces of equipment for healthcare or for just barely how to function, we are going to need to ensure that as small island states, we keep far more on island than we would have been accustomed to do in the last 20 or so years. So food and water is critical. I had a session this morning with Dr. Farrell from the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology. Why? Because in this year of our Lord, we have gone from having, in the first 6 months of the year, 50% of the rainfall of the last 30-year average, to the last 5 months, to the flooding that destroyed a lot of the crops in the ground, largely because of the inundation of the rain and the convection rain, which is something more prevalent in Jamaica and Miami than it has been in our part of the world, quite frankly. And that's because of the extreme heat in the afternoons, etc. So we're going to have to transition agriculture into more climate-controlled agriculture where possible. And the Ministry of Agriculture is working to do that, while at the same time expanding the water supply to those farms that need to in St. Lucie and in St. Philip in particular, which have been challenged. The St. George Valley continues to be what it is, the breadbasket, but we need to come to terms with access to water in St. Philip and St. Lucie in order to sustain what we're doing, and to use also more technology, more capital, and to move away from the plantation model of agriculture to a completely modern version of how we produce our food and why. The fourth one is keeping safe and being healthy. Simple. I made sure I came in here not to be tempted, so I came after the meal. And it is because it's a public journey now. You can't be in this job and do anything privately. So that effectively, the personal commitment that we need each and every Barbadian to take towards healthy eating and wellness is not a conversation piece. It is reality. This country's bills with respect to dialysis continue to rise, largely because of uncontrollable chronic NCDs, in particular diabetes that is uncontrollable. I've said over and over that diabetes is at epidemic proportions in this country. and we have to change how we eat. I want to applaud the Ministry of Education for making more progress than I could make when I was Minister of Education with respect to starting to change the school meals, because the truth is that if we don't change how our children are eating, we will not change the trajectory of healthcare in this country. And the cost of healthcare is simply too high for us to continue on this path. Now, I can say these things and people can listen or they cannot listen. But be sure as day follows night, there are consequences to behavioral choices. And the consequences to behavioral choices in terms of health and safety are very, very immediate. You put in, you get back out. You don't put in, you don't get back out. And we know it individually, but we also now need to know it in terms of the collective safety of the country. There was a time in this country when businessmen belonged to all the cricket clubs and used to go and spend 3-4 days a week, afternoon, playing cricket and liming with one another, and invariably you had some who had access to power and wealth and some who were so far from power and wealth, as Kirk said, that they had to depend on acts of charity and relationships. The reality is, if you talk to Cigarfield Sobers and you talk to many of our cricketers, their development was further supported by older men, in particular, some women, but mainly men, who took the time to spend time with them. Barbados is not going to turn the corner fully unless we change how we relate to each other in this society and in these communities. If you don't mix, if you don't find platforms for intergenerational and interclass mixing, that's why I've never been a fan of gated communities. Because all you do, and in fact it was Tom Adams on his death, they did a supplement in the Nation, and you would do well to go and take a copy of it, and you'll see a quotation from Tom saying exactly why gated communities should not become part and parcel of our landscape here. Because the more you put up fences and gates, what do? People want to know what's behind them, and then all of a sudden want to break it down. But yet we have homes, and large homes and villas that have existed all through the West Coast next to chattel houses, and what happened? Who break who house? Nobody. It's the sociology of smallness that we have to come to understand if we're going to turn the corner. And what does it mean? That we don't only want money in the one family program. If I wanted money alone, we would have left it as just a donation and a fund. What we need is time. What we need is individual families being vetted and being approved to support this family. So when you go and you see that the youngster is a good runner, but he ain't got no sneakers, so shoot, I can bring him back a pair of sneakers the next time. Or my sister coming in from New York, I can get her to bring a piece of paper, let me measure out your foot. That is the Bajan way. I like? You measure out your foot on a piece of paper and you get your shoes for your body. The bottom line is, I'm asking those of you who lead in the private sector in this country, and I learned it from my uncle when I was about 14, 15 years old when he was managing the NCF. And I was there trying to knock wrong and get some stagehand work. And I heard him take a call from some people in St. Andrew asking for some tents and stage sections. And anybody who knows Ilombe knows his brusqueness. No? So he said, Mr. So-and-so got a shop there. He got 2 lorries. Go and beg him to use the 2 lorries. And the other lady next door, she always got tarpaulin. Go and ask her for a piece of tarpaulin. And when he put down the phone, I asked him, but you got stage sections out there? You see them there? And tents. Why are you doing it? Because Carifesta had just finished. He said, no. They need to go and learn to be able to find solutions for what they want to do, and they need to find the solutions first and foremost from the communities in which they live. And they need to be able to develop the relationships that even though they're 18 and 20 and 21, they should be talking to the man who is 60-something that running the shop, who don't normally say other than 2 words to anybody, good morning, and goodbye. Because he don't talk. So you're intimidated by that? No. You need to build the intergenerational, the interracial, and the interclass relationships. Our country is too small not to do it. The fifth mission relates to empowerment and enfranchisement. That is the mission of the post-colonial, post-slavery society. That's why we come to work every day, to give people a chance. Probably 80% of us in this room are within 2 to 3 generations of poverty, if not 95%. Just a question of what time you get on the train. You get on the train at 9 o'clock, you get on the train at midday, you get on the train at 3 o'clock this afternoon. There's still got people waiting to get on the train. Still got people waiting to get on the train. So because you get on the train and move don't mean that you can just go along. And that is why educational transformation will come to be the most consequential of all of the things that we do at this point in our time. If you talk to Alwyn Adams or any of the others who know as former principals what transpired to allow the common entrance to come into this country, the fact that it was predicated on a set of policies in the United Kingdom in the late 50s that were effectively discovered to be promulgated by a racist, then you begin to understand what really was happening. And it appeared to be good to us because it was like a gift. Because for the first time, the children of poor people could have a chance to get into some of these old grammar schools. But for every 2 or 3 that you took, you were condemning 5 or 6 to purgatory. The country can't operate with condemning the numbers of people that we are condemning at the point of the 11 plus. If we want to have safety, and if we want to have development, and if we want to move Barbados to the next level where we have global citizens with Bajan roots. In Dubai last week, I met a number of Bajans out there, youngsters doing their own thing. They didn't come there because of government. A lot of them out there working on their own, finding their pathway. And that is exactly what we need to do even as we bring people here. We need to create global citizens with Bajan roots. Enfranchisement, the government is doing state-owned enterprise reform because in every instance where there has been fiscal imbalances in the Caribbean, Ryan, tell them, it has come because of excessive expenditure, predominantly in state-owned enterprises more than even central government. Because the central government typically had rules that controlled people more and constrained expenditure and provided greater transparency more. But in the SOPs, the opaqueness of operations led, therefore, to the accumulated debt, and by extension, therefore, with the subventions, deficits, and then debt again, at the national level this time, that we've been carrying. We had to pause the restructuring of the SOEs because of COVID. We did some, we're now doing some again. There's some that we would love to keep, but you can't just keep. We can't continue to put $40 million in subsidies in a transport board. Not when a hospital needs to move to the next level. We can't continue to put in the sugar industry money after money. The sugar industry has probably gotten close to $1 billion in the last 50 years as support. At the very time when you shouldn't be dealing with the sugar industry anymore, you've got to deal with the sugar and the energy industry. And we need to be able to ensure that along with the agro-processing opportunities and the other things will create a pathway that agricultural people, farmers will see a pathway where they don't have to depend on government taking out large sums of money for the support of SOEs in this country, because we have other things that we must spend on if we are to turn the corner and to make it. And then finally, digitization. There's not a person in this room that don't use this. Not a person. But we are not yet moving our systems in the public and private sector as fast as we should. And I take responsibility for the fact that during COVID, we did as much as we could, but we had to pause down. The Barbados ID card, therefore, should have been, if there was no COVID, we would have finished the digital ID rollout a long time ago. We now have the majority of people in the country with it. We need to get people comfortable with how to use it and when to use it. We have the digital payments framework more and more, and the banks are fully on board and the credit unions with us. And I would expect that over the course of the next 12 months, we will see far greater penetration into the digital ecosystems for the conduct of commerce in this country. What that does ultimately, however, is to remove the boundaries in a very real sense from us being able to exploit more e-commerce and more sale of goods and services across national boundaries. By the same token, cybersecurity has to be mastered both at the public and private level, because it is as real as the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. Because if you don't master it, as many of you know, with the prevalence of ransomware and other things, it will shut you down. Secondly, at the same time, we have to be a voice. Barbados continues to provide thought leadership on a number of global issues. And we cannot be reduced back into a corner because there are a few people who want to reduce us back into a corner for narrow political gains for old-time politics. It cannot work. If we did not make noise through the Bridgetown Initiative, we would not have debt pause clauses or natural disaster clauses across the globe now. If we have not made the noise that we've been making, the World Bank would continue to be seeing us as an outsider, an interloper that does not deserve funding at concessional levels. I'm happy to report that we are likely to be eligible again for IBRD funding in a way that we were not for the last 30 years, and that process is being undertaken now. What does that mean in real terms? Gregory is here. He can tell you that that's the difference between paying debt at 9 and 10% and paying debt at 4 and 5%. So that these things create the space for us to be able to do the other things that we must do. But in order for us to do that, it means thought leadership. And on the area of artificial intelligence, we need to have global thought leadership too. Because at the end of the day, the machines that we have, yes, will do many things. But the one thing that we must never replace is the human element. And that's why I encourage more Barbadians, even as you look at jobs, because a lot of jobs will go by the wayside. And the country is going to have, with the Minister of Labour, to embark on an exercise now that allows us to see which jobs will be sustained in the medium term. Because if we try to sustain jobs that are no longer relevant anymore, we will lose competitiveness. If we lose competitiveness, we lose what? Business. Simple facts. So we are at that stage now where we have to be walking and chewing and doing all kinds of things, because the world in which we live is completely different from the first 50 years of our independence existence. And I therefore ask all of you today to join us, because this path can only happen not because the government says it must happen, not because the government might pass a few elements of legislation or make available some money. It begins to happen in a real way, as we learned with Saving the Dollar, when we bring the social partnership to the table. And when on that first morning that we were a government on the 28th of May, after the cabinet was sworn in, and we went round person by person by person by person in the room, who in here wants to save the Barbados dollar? Everybody said yes, of course, after the 20 or so people spoke. I said, how you want to do it? And everybody spoke. At the end of it, 80% of the ideas were shared by all three limbs of the social partnership, because we put Barbados first. When COVID came, we knew that however much we had the girth to withstand more than most of you could withstand individually, that it could not be government alone again. If the tourism workers did not, and that is why I'm sympathetic to their cause, if the tourism workers did not agree to the amendment of the Severance Payments Act, Kerry will tell you, in that room upstairs, it got rough, it got loud, it got murky. But after a few meetings, they did what most Bajans would do. They put country first and stopped the implosion of the hotel sectors, both with respect to individual hotel establishments whose severance bill would have killed them, but equally with respect to the severance payments fund of the National Insurance Scheme, which would have been bankrupted in tutus. Share the burden, share the bounty. That has been the one thing that has guided this government from the very first budget 2 weeks after we were elected. And if you doubt otherwise, you doubt we live in. Because we need to make sure that people comply with their obligations in terms of seeing people, hearing people, and feeling people. Similarly, during that same COVID period, if we did not have the sanitation workers and the people in the supermarkets and the nurses and the doctors and the water authority people, if they weren't going up, what would happen to all of us? We understood the value of each and every job in this country. And what saved us as a nation was once again coming together, labor, capital, households, church, mosque, every group, and government. I say to you today from my heart, like Martin Luther King said, I may not get there with you, but I know you have to. I say to you from my heart, this country is at an interesting inflection point at the very time that the world is facing its most perilous time in a century, almost. 80 years if you want to be absolutely accurate. Let us commit to doing that which we can together, because there are some battles that not even our unity will allow us to fight easily. Some are global, as we learned this morning at 3 o'clock. As I learn tomorrow, some are regional. We have the ability to stay the course. I ask you to remember your purpose, not only spiritually, but also as a citizen or resident of this nation. I ask you to remember your missions. And what we did was to remove the doubt as to what the collective missions of the country should be. I ask you to remember some values, a commitment to excellence. Because when you're small, learn now about women. We have to be twice as good to be considered half as good. We have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. And it's no different for small countries. We carry as a small nation the same constraints that women walk with for centuries. I ask you to remember perseverance and resilience. Because if your grandparents and my grandparents and great-grandparents didn't remember that, none of us would be here. Haiti first had a treasury for the first time in the mid-1990s when Owen Arthur sent people from the Barbados Treasury to help them establish a treasury for the first time, in spite of being a republic from as early as the 19th century. And I ask you to remember empathy, because we learned in Sunday school or in the mosque or in the temples or wherever, and certainly in our schools, that the golden rule matters. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This country is performing better than most globally. I'm not asking you, and I'm not even prepared to tolerate those who just want, for cheap political purposes, to continue to construct a narrative to make people feel that we have no gains and we have no future. But I am telling you that what is required of us now is to hold hands once again around these missions and to make Barbados that place that can continue not just to punch above its weight, but to be a place of choice for us first and foremost, but for others who want to visit, for others who want to invest, for others who want to engage. And the only way we're going to do it is by embracing the missions. And the last thing that I ask you to remember is partnership. One blow might kill old cow, but it ain't gonna get you very far. The reality is that the partnership that allowed Life of Barbados to become part, along with Mutual, to become Sagicor, to become a major global player in the Americas, is a story that we have to replicate. We do not have enough Barbadians to be dominant and to secure our future globally on our own. But through strategic partnerships, believe you me, and through continued strategic thought leadership, we can make the difference to the next 50 years of this country. Like those who get a cold, sometimes you need a little Buckley's. It don't kill, but it's work, and it's helped you. And when that Buckley's comes and you feel better, then you run again. If you get into trouble, we stop the bleeding, we pause, we fix it, and then we run again. But I ask you to recognize that all of this will come to naught without your personal commitment at the level of your companies, your employees, and indeed the general country. You have a responsibility, therefore, not to depend on Trisha Tannis, not to depend on Jimmy Clark, not to depend on all of the other private sector heads. And for your workers, they have an opportunity, but they can't depend on the labor leaders alone. We need now to drill down into our departments, our units, to be able to get people to understand, just as I've done in Beijing, just as I've done, keep the place clean. Keep the place clean and let me make sure we can live on it. Don't let me hear that you don't believe in yourself, because look in the mirror and know that you ain't better than nobody and nobody ain't better than you. Make sure that the people around you got something to eat and drink when the day come, even if it's down the road from you. Make sure that everybody eating and drinking, as you heard Kirk say just now. Make sure that whenever done, you're taking care of yourself. Because if you ain't healthy, what does it tell you on the airplane to do? Put on the mask first before you even help your baby. Because if you ain't healthy, I ain't know nobody who bring back anybody from the dead yet. And similarly, you need the place safe, because if you don't have a safe environment, then all bets are off in terms of freedom. And whenever done, don't believe that only a few can make the journey and leave the rest out there, because the rest can find a way of ensuring that you ain't gonna be safe. Because at that point, if you have nothing to lose, you have nothing to lose. And then finally, do not believe that you can live in an analog environment when the rest of the world is fast, past digital into AI and all other kinds of things. That must be the conversation in each and every company and each and every department within companies for the next 6 months, because the missions that we have set give us till 2030 to measure progress. And like those who struggle with weight, you ain't gonna wait till 2030 to measure progress. We're gonna start measuring progress every 3 to 6 months, depending on what the area is, because some need 6 months and some need 3 months. Because there must be willingness for course correction if necessary. If you need any help, if you are weary, you want a shoulder to cry on, they got some people in here who are my cabinet and myself, and we volunteer. But what cannot happen is to press pause or stop. Thank you.
So thank you, Prime Minister, for speaking to us in the Beijing way. Clear, direct, and thought-provoking. So we'll now go to the Q&A session. During the Q&A session, there's a mic here, and there's a mic there. Feel free to step up, identify yourself, and ask your question. We're also going to use Slido. So everybody has the app. George, you got your app. Slido, questions and answers. and I'll moderate this session. Test them. So while you get your thoughts together on questions, Prime Minister, when you shared your thoughts on or break down Mission 1 to us, something came to my mind, and I think the private sector has a responsibility and can help with our clean environment. You know, the recycling effort that the government implemented and is leading, and you know, you see bottles, all types of garbage all over the place. And you travel and you visit various commercial centers, whether it's a supermarket. And I thought that as a business community, one way we can probably help is if, for example, Massey, I'm going to call Massey Mr. Right as an example, because I think that's a very good location. If they can actually set up some recycling bins and similar types of commercial houses, Sagicor as well, where people that visit those premises on a daily basis can actually deposit things. We underwrite the costs, collect the garbage, and the government facilitates the dump.
You can start with coconut shells?
But we can start with coconut shells, because that is an eyesore, right?
But it's not only an eyesore, it's actually a material that
can
has
recycle.
value.
Yeah.
So thank you. Minister Ford, as I said, is on his way back from COP28, Minister of Environment. But the truth is that he also has put us in a position now. There's actually a paper that we've had that we're going through. So I'd be more than happy for him and the Senior Minister, Jerome Walker, to meet with the private sector agencies to be able to see how best we can have the collection started. But at the same time, they're rolling out not just for the big people, they're rolling out because households have to start doing it at the individual level. And that's where we're trying to get going forward. So thank you for that offer.
You're welcome. Mr. Armstrong? I can hear you, but I don't think everybody can.
Something working.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Right.
All right. I need to get into the digital world, obviously. So, Prime Minister, thank you. A very inspiring speech again. And I want to personally thank you for everything you're doing for Barbados with your travels around the world. I've told a lot of people who tell me, the PM is traveling too much. I say, but look, she's getting grants and significant grants. So it's not just loans. So, I mean, honestly, thank you very much for everything you're doing.
The truth is that because of the green transition, the opportunity for a lot of philanthropic capital and grants is there. We got $80 million for the Barbados Water Authority. I don't know that anybody has ever given the Water Authority that level of money before as a grant. We have other grants that we are now also getting and working with, and the most interesting of which is going to be, I'm sorry that Lisa is obviously in the Senate today, dealing with the amendment to the Utilities Regulation Act, but the reality is that we know that we have grid instability because we have not invested in the batteries. Part of that is the difficulty that we went through with the regulatory framework, and I've, in this room, spoken to it over the last 2 years. But the government has now determined that it has to move to a competitive procurement framework for battery storage, and that is without prejudice to the work that is being done also on pump storage by others. So that the bottom line is, we believe that we can get there, but what we have benefited from now, and I launched it in Dubai last Saturday with the Prime Minister of Norway, Saturday before last, and others, with the Rockefeller Foundation, the Bezos Foundation, and IKEA Foundation, which is they have a global energy plan that is effectively putting $2 billion into matters pertaining to transition into renewable energy and battery storage in particular. But what they're also doing is opening up opportunities for access to batteries that are not necessarily at commercial scale yet, but may even have better prospects than the traditional lithium-ion batteries, so that Barbados is prepared to see how we can be on the cutting edge with them, both in terms of the technology, but also benefiting from blended capital that will therefore mean that the consumer pays less than the consumer might otherwise have to pay.
Okay, but so my question for you was, when I became vice president of the chamber back in 2008, the president at the time, Glenda Medford, she delegated to me. She said, you go sit on the modernization of customs, excise, and VAT committee, because there was a big program going on to modernize those. And two of the things we talked a lot about back then were electronic single window and trusted trader, although we didn't call it that at the time, we called it risk analysis. So I wondered if you could give us an update
Certainly.
on those two, trusted trader and electronic
The Trusted
single
Trader
window.
program has started and it is being expanded. And for those who don't know, the Trusted Trader program is simply, to use a cricket analogy, you're good, you're trusted until you step on the crease. You step on the crease, you're out. Simple as that. So what we've basically tried to do is to make for certain large importers to become trusted traders, and then they will do periodic audits to make sure that people are not playing the fool or playing the system. With respect to the single window, that has been more, you said 2008. I was the Minister of Economic Development that started it in 2006. Okay. But the reality is that I think we are close, Kerry, to the end, probably within a year or so. What we will have to do, and what I've had to insist, Ryan will tell you, is that the length of time that containers are staying in the port is way too long. And in many instances, it is not because they're not available to be taken out. It is just that people use it as a form of storage, or people just take their time to move it. And we may have to make some legislative amendments to be able to force people to move stuff out of the port at a quicker rate and to make the port far more responsive, therefore, with that. We've had, as you know, to take security, because when we came to office, there were serious problems with security at the port, and that, in fact, led to the influx of guns, if I'm to listen to the former commissioner and the former attorney general. The bottom line, however, is that we believe that we can make the amendments to the legislation that will cause people's behavior to change. I'm having to do it now at the airport. I'm not talking anymore. I'm being very straight. The Ministry of Tourism and the senior minister myself have had now 2 meetings with all of the airport people, the baggage handlers, everybody, and the foolishness that is happening with us taking too long to clear people's bags and to give them the kind of welcome to this country that will make them repeat visitors again, is at risk if we don't change. So the government has taken a decision, fine. We agree, what is the international standard for moving everything? If they meet next week and they agree to fines, great. If they don't agree to fines and it comes to the Ministry of Finance, I got a minister there in the Ministry of Finance that is called the Grinch. So he might have a view of fines that are much higher than the airport and the companies will have. We're not talking anymore. The end of the day, you miss the timelines, you pay the fine. And we're going to have to do the same thing at the port, because we've come to the conclusion that there are certain things that can no longer be the subject of conversation. You know, there was the famous saying from E.M. Forster, the time for telegrams and anger is over, but the time for conversation is over.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And
Thank
one
you.
favor, if you could put in a good word for our company with a trusted trader. We've been waiting.
So you want to be in the expanded program. And you, like me, I don't think any players got stumped last night, did they? You know how to stay within the crease.
Thank you,
Thank
Andy. Stephen? He was there. He was first? Oh, Sorry. Thank you, Stephen. Dennis Augustine, Conabos Consulting, Inc. And actually, if you put in a good word so we can change the name to Digital Alliance, as it should be, with the registry. As you know, can tell from my accent, I'm a son of the Caribbean, but you called for me about a year and a half. Didn't know you were calling for me, but for people to come and to contribute to this digital revolution that we have burgeoning here. And I've seen a lot of laudable investments into building capacity, and I've met a lot of wonderful young professionals who come out of UE with degrees. But sadly, and I'm not particularly bright, but over the last 26 years and through entrepreneurship, I've built a couple good companies. And I've noticed a lot of young people here who come out with degrees, and they're capable technologists and professionals, and they want to go work for some North American company. And so we're pouring money into the top of the bucket, but there's a hole in the bucket. And I'm just wondering how folks like myself and others can help us plug that hole so we build the capacity and it stays here.
That's why mission number 2 counts. And as I said, we gotta look in the mirror and love who we see. And y'all may think that I've come here to talk soft talk, but this is the biggest problem in this country. The identity issues and the trust issues that are still a carry-on from a history that we've not come to terms with. Bottom line is, the government is doing as much as it can. We've started the training program and had, through the Student Revolving Loan Fund, invested now millions of dollars in order to be able to train Bajans to be global citizens with Bajan roots. So the program we did with cybersecurity, that has been good. 140 people started it. 120 people finished, the other 20 for other reasons that they'll get a chance again that I'm not going to go into here. All 120 people are earning 60,000 Barbados dollars a year or more after 4 months of training. All 120 people are earning $60,000 a year after 4 months of training. We're about to start the early AI entry, and it sounds highfalutin, but what it really is keying in data to allow AI to function. And that is a 2-month training program. And once again, we have said and committed to 2,000 people initially, but as I've said to the country, they will take 15,000 from me if I had it. So that as long as the appetite is there on the part of Barbadians to be trained, you don't need to have CXCs, you don't need to have none of that. You just need to come forward. We were focusing predominantly on younger people, but guess what? There are a number of people between the ages of 50 and 65, 67 who may, for whatever reason, have been laid off, may have to be home taking care of a dependent who is not ambulatory, and therefore they can also step into the program. And the quicker, the more people we get, the more we train, because you're doing global work. I want to thank you for hinting at it, because our biggest problem is confidence in ourselves. And if you believe that you can only open a business and operate it and make your money from $270,000 to $67,000 now, you're playing a very dangerous game. And why? It means then that we are pushing our prices up in every instance, because everybody wants to make their living and to live the standard of living that they would have even if they were living in Jamaica or the States or in a much larger market. But if you want to do that and live here, then it means that export, opening up, going global has to be the core of your DNA. Because if you try to extract all the benefits for your company from 267,000 people, it means your price structure is going to be highly uncompetitive and will not be able to transcend outside of these boundaries. It's too simple. So what does it mean? Hand-ups instead of handouts, changing people's focus, and getting people to understand that there are global opportunities. There are Barbadians in the diaspora in Canada. They've been working very closely with us. I'm also getting done, and I've asked the Ministry of Finance to do it. We're going to use some tools to do an analysis. I told the Social Partnership on Monday to do an analysis of all of government's procurement to ensure that the Procurement Act that has just been proclaimed within the last 2 months, that act can become true to its purposes, which is ensuring that some disadvantaged groups be given the opportunities in terms of government procurement, but at the same time, making sure that we can measure. Because if we're not measuring, then we don't know whether the consolidation is taking place at the expense of others.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope that others will take note. The other thing is we've established, I forgot, the GovTech agency in September. Minister Ishmael can tell you, and I believe Mr. George Connolly is the chair, and that is going to be used to be able to unlock all the digital opportunities in Mission 6. But I want to appeal to the Chamber and to those in the tourism sector. The two of you need to be on the front line of transitioning all of your processes digitally in a safe and secure way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Prime Minister. So you've spoken about water and the $80 million grant that was that you recently got for the Water Authority. You made a
Not
pass.
recent, but
Well,
last 2 years or 3 years.
it's
But go
there.
ahead.
It's there. You made a passing mention to the Golan Heights and the issue with water there. So I actually live in an area that's served by Bowmanston, so I'm accustomed to having brown water every time the rain falls. Minister Weir spoke of the expectation of drought, low rainfall in the upcoming year. So what are some of your plans? What are the key initiatives that the government is going to do with respect to the Water Authority and the continuation of safe, clean water in our society?
Water Authority is perhaps the most complex SOE that we have. And I've reached the conclusion that in addition to the things that we're doing, the restructuring and the repurposing of the Water Authority's governance has also to be on the table. We have a single entity that is supposed to be regulatory, that is supposed to be distribution, that is supposed to be augmentation, and that is supposed to do research as well and everything. And you end up with a salmon top retriever or a good old common dog. You understand? As not being able to secure excellence in each of the 4 areas. So governance has to be addressed frontally, and that is why both Mr. David Wright and Mr. Doddridge Miller have been brought in as chair and deputy chair to get to the bottom of that. Secondly, a lot of the systems that we have, tens of millions of dollars was spent by the last government, and we are no better with respect to some of the systems, particularly the IT systems, after, and I see Ryan say just now when I said it, because it is a headache. So we're getting to the bottom of that. Thirdly, we need to be able to deal with the augmentation, because with all due respect, we are seeing a climate crisis that's affecting us in many ways. And therefore, whether the augmentation is going to come from groundwater resources or desal, you heard me say that I met with Dr. Farrell earlier today, and one of the things that he was able to do was to update me on when we will get the information on the groundwater. Both they've been looking at St. Lucie and St. Philip, and that will be key. You've heard much debate locally, and I want to address it too, about the debt for climate swap that we are doing with the upgrading of the South Coast Sewage Treatment Plant, and we will therefore be able to have tertiary treated water used to be able to replenish our aquifers and also for agricultural purposes. For those who try to use disparaging terms of what we're doing, we're actually using we will be using cleaner water that is going in the aquifer now and cleaner water that is irrigating the crops now, because you will actually be treating the water rather than using and letting untreated water go to those purposes. The bottom line is that the savings in the repurchase of $300 million of our debt will allow us to help finance that plant over the course of the next 18 months to 2 years, with the help of the Inter-American Development Bank, which is taking 40% of it, the European Investment Bank, which we got the clearance with them when I was in Europe last month, and also the Green Climate Fund, which takes a little longer, and we may have to have some bridging finance to make up for the time. But the beauty of the GCF is that it is grant money when it comes in. So that will help us replenish the aquifers in St. Philip, and also will help us deal with the ones with agricultural. We also looking to do the same thing with the Bridgetown treatment plant and to push that water up to St. Lucie as well. In addition, age-old pipes, non-revenue water. The level of non-revenue water in the country is way too high, and the reality is that we will not be able to fix it overnight. The British put down those pipes when they had an empire. We have a country. That's the first thing. So we ain't got no empire. So you're limited by fiscally what you can do, but you're equally limited by infrastructurally what is possible, because you can't dig up the whole island all at once either. So we believe that the combined methods there will help us resolve the issues. If ever there was a need for an entity to be world class, it has to be the Barbados Water Authority. And therefore, I'm giving the country the commitment that over the next few years, we've brought some of our very best and brightest brains in the country to be able to come to the table to deal with the management of the board and to ensure that we can therefore make the transition, because without water, we have nothing.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It sounds
Thank you.
like that 80 million will need to be 80 billion. But anyway.
If you know somebody who has it, let them come.
So thank you. So we have some questions.
The pipes will take about 20 years to do. Don't let anybody fool you. It's going to take about 20 years to replace the entire distribution system.
So there are no quick fixes. So we have about 14 questions in Slido. Thanks for using the tool. Prime Minister, there's a question around how do we monitor and evaluate the implementation and effectiveness of our mission economy goals?
That's exactly why I said that we're putting the measurements in place.
Yeah.
In some instances, it's easy to measure. If we say we want health, wellness to be healthier by 50% by 2030, or we want to be safer, that those measurements come in terms of the metrics that we capture in public health already and in our health system, and with respect to safety, what the police capture. So we know the amount of crimes and murders and violence, etc., and we're in a position to capture that. Those that relate to identity, well, you're going to see it with the pep in the step and the removal of the risk-averse nature of Bajans. If we can start to see Bajans stop looking at $14 billion in a bank in savings and look at it with great, great admiration, rather than taking the money and investing it in areas that will grow and that will give a greater return than the 0.01%. So those are going to be more difficult to measure. Cleanliness, that's easy for all of us to measure, and we saw it. When we stopped with the ash workers, you saw the country go back into bush. And that's why we say we have to shift the burden of proof, because to keep the ash workers on full-time will cost the country about $15 million. We don't have it. So therefore, we shift the burden of proof so that individual owners of property start to comply with their obligations. And if you don't, we will do it. We will pay the workers, but we will charge you for what we paid, and we will also give you a penalty that you will have to pay, so it makes it easier for you to hire them rather than us to go to the stress of hiring them. With respect to digitization, that's easy to measure too, and those metrics will be there between the Central Bank, Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, and Ministry of Innovation to determine the appropriate metrics for that. The one that's going to be difficult, and you heard Kirk recently announce that the government will undertake a poverty survey, so that we have baseline data for where we are in this decade. Our data before is aged, and we need to have more modern data in order to track where we're going. Food security, simple. I told Linda, the more land that remain as in bush and rab land, the people will make their own judgments as to what level of food production is taking place. But I will say we are seeing increased production in crops, but what we are not seeing, and we had problems with the poultry industry in particular with the climate, as well as some other issues this year, so there's a slight decline in poultry, but there's a new feed plant, I think, that will be operating from February, and people will have opportunities, therefore, to be competitive in that market for a change or going back. We used to have 2 plants before, so for those who forget those days, we're just going back to there, and I think there's a 3rd one wanting to enter the market there. So there are a number of metrics.
Thank you. Yes,
I
sir.
saw something there just now about Business Barbados. Before you come, Business Barbados, the cabinet has taken a decision to establish Business Barbados, which is effectively to take the corporate registry and to take it out from being a government department, but also to have a business facilitation unit. And because the technological changes have not been sufficient to turn the corner. And I don't want to get into that because that might get a little invidious in here because it's not just government's fault. But the bottom line is that we also need a dedicated unit. Invest Barbados helps investors come in. Export Barbados helps those who want to export. We need Business Barbados to facilitate business for Bajans because right now, at the best will in the world, the government has put the systems in place, but the changes have not been as quick as we would have liked to have seen. Part of me believes that the country is still in a COVID comatose state, and I hope that 2024 will see us shedding all of the rest of that comatose state that has existed since COVID.
Prime Minister, just want to follow through on the business facilitation. So there are countries or foreign entities, companies investing in Barbados. I assume that the business facilitation support will help connect some of those foreign investors.
Yeah, Invest Barbados does that already. What we're now trying to do is to create an opportunity for Business Barbados to be able to unlock the kinds of things that cause you all to use 2 bad words or to say. And some of them I use too, because they make no sense. And therefore, the other thing that we've done, and I shared this with the private sector and the labor movement on Monday, is that the estimates, January is estimates month, and I do nothing else, the others will tell you. I just put down my head, because that's when you understand what the whole of government is doing. And we have sent out the circular saying 2 things. Do not come without telling us how you are complying with emissions, and do not come without completing, because I'm tired of talking about deconstruct and reconstruct. And some ministries have done it well, and others are still lagging. You cannot use a 20th century or a 19th century mechanism to meet 21st century country. And the reality is that we believe in some instances that our duty is just to manage, but our duty also is to transform, because if the mechanisms that we have are outdated or no longer applicable, we can't get very far with them. So I expect to see in the same way, you know, Cabinet has not had a file in 4 years. Fantastic. I don't know what a piece of paper looks like in my office. Don't use paper. And when people try to bring it to me, I say, I'm not doing it. But then I have ministries still trying to use and tell me estimates that they need $100,000 or $200,000 in stationery. It has to stop. And it has to stop not because we just want it to stop, but we need the efficiency gains and we need the improvements in time in order to be competitive.
Thank you. Good evening, Prime Minister Motley. Good to see you again. Mike Lucas from Pan American Insurance.
Yep.
As we speak about health, I'm wondering how close are we to a national health insurance initiative?
It's complicated. The WHO sent in some people and they're working with us. Senior Minister Walcott has the responsibility now. And I think that because of COVID, I had hoped that in the first 5 years we would have been able to put this to bed. It is not. So I would imagine that we probably are still about a year, 18 months away because of the complexity. We have used, however, if you recall, the health levy at NIS to be that bridge that has allowed us to maintain adequate coverage, and particularly during COVID even. So that levy will probably bring into the country, Ryan, about what, $85, $90 million this year. The health services levy for the NIS, and we use that money entirely for the hospital to be able to expand services. And it's going to be critical because we're going to have to do a hypothecation of that revenue in order to finance the capital purchases. The hospital needs to buy about just under $200 million in equipment. And therefore, we've been trying, and this is one of the things that has hurt me, that we have been trying to work with the local financial sector to ensure that that hypothecation of the levy is sufficient for the repayment of the debt rather than asking for a government guarantee. Because I'm not going to give a government guarantee when people then would be asking me to apply belt suspenders and hoists for security, when in truth and in fact the hypothecation of the levy is sufficient security and would be sufficient security in any other market. So that's some of the weeds that we've been fighting up with, and it's taken longer than we hoped. So short answer, national health insurance expanded probably 12 to 18 months from now because of all the delays we've had. But in the interim, we continue to use the health services levy to help shift the burden off of the consolidated fund and to allow us to meet the services of the people.
Thank you.
Thank you. It sounds as though you want to make some submissions, though, at Pan American Health, and government is open to all submissions.
I'll commit our organization and Sagicor as well to engage in
Please.
the discussion.
I like, since Paul committed you to come along in the One Family initiative, that's a fair exchange.
Correct. Yeah. There's a question around what improved social policy support does the government intend to give to parents who contribute to the increase of the Barbados population size? Interesting one.
Yeah, it depends, and it will come to be discussed in a serious way as we go forward. But I want to make the point that even if we put those measures in place, those are a 25-year solution. And what the country needs now is an immediate solution, because we are seeing declining population size affecting everything from our ability to find people, find talent, to have a market that is large enough to do all of those things. So there are some countries that have put it in place. Not all of them have been very successful, but it's a conversation we're prepared to have with the public. But at the same time, we have to have an approach of managed migration, and that's really going to be the big conversation in early 2024.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alfie Wiggins, Prime Minister's envoy to Guyana and Suriname. What I wanted to speak about, some person talked about health earlier, and the Prime Minister always speaks about, looking in the mirror. And there is a COVID inquiry going on in a country somewhere in the world right now. And if you hear the evidence that is coming out from that COVID inquiry, you would understand the genius and the expertise that the Prime Minister of Barbados and Lieutenant, the Most Honorable Colonel Bostic, did with this country, Barbados, during that, I would say, horrible period of time. And I would have known that the government would have suffered a lot from the negative comments that would have come from us Barbadian citizens, the way the country was being managed and so on during that time. But if you look at large countries in the world now and see the evidence that is coming out, you would realize, and a lot of the international community has realized, what we in a small island developing state like Barbados, the asset that we have in a Prime Minister Motley. She could lead any country in this world.
I only want to lead Barbados, so that's right out there.
And I'm saying
it's a perfect marriage.
And I'm saying that, I listened to the evidence coming out of the COVID inquiry and the way it made the citizens of that country feel. And it just shows us in Barbados that we need to appreciate what we have here. Because the Prime Minister always says, look in the mirror, look at ourselves. I think we as a country, whether we're looking at investments, whether we're looking at exports, We need to have a lot more confidence in ourselves when we go out there on that international stage representing Barbados, because we have confidence in ourselves, because we are backed and supported by a prime minister and a government who has the capacity and the capability to lead any large country in the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Roxanne.
Well, it makes me feel bad to ask the question that I
Oh,
intend
please.
to ask.
Ask it.
Go ahead.
You know that I play all sides of the wicket.
Right. So I'm sure you're very happy that tourism kept up their side after COVID to help the economy grow in the way that it has. So when you spoke about what's happening between Guyana and Venezuela, that is perhaps the number one threat to what looks to be an excellent year coming. You are going down, I understand, to have discussions with Venezuela and Guyana. But I am just wondering, with CARICOM coming out in support of Guyana, have you not already signaled that you've picked a side?
Not necessarily. Statecraft is a complex set of skills that has kept civilization going for millennia. And I have to have the confidence that with each day and with the capacity of language, as we learned at 3 o'clock this morning, all things are possible. Yesterday, there was a battle between phase out and phase down. And today we have an agreement with transition away. Now, there are some people who will not understand the nuance that is there, and there are others who will understand it and find comfort in it. The simple question is for all of us, and CARICOM, the seat of CARICOM is in Guyana. So the CARICOM single market and single economy is effectively that everything that is regional is domestic, and everything that is domestic is regional. So that what we are doing is dealing with a part of the family. But as you and I both know, that even in the best of families, arguments and fights is break out. And you have to find ways, even when people are right, to be able to lower the temperature, because you don't want your neighbors to get involved, or you don't want nobody to get hurt by accident. So it's no different. And as I said, while the time for conversation is over for those who handle baggage at the airport, the time for conversation is never over when it comes to peace. P-E-A-C-E. So we hope that we can keep the temperatures down. And I think that you and I both know that how next year looks, the truth is, it would be a travesty. And you would really feel that something going on in the atmosphere that, I don't know.
No, I was just wondering, given that, obviously the hope, what is our backup plan? If it doesn't, first of all, are you confident that Venezuelan authorities
It's going on. Even if I was, I'm not going to speak in public.
Right.
Because the nature of statecraft does not admit of these things. But secondly, I don't want people to believe that this is a Elizabeth on Bewitched moment where you can twiddle your nose and solve the problem. This is a patient process. This is a process where we need to leave all egos at the side, and where we need to focus on the big picture, which is the peace. When the war broke out in Gaza and Israel, I made one statement internationally when they asked me to make a statement and to do something with the UN. And I said simply, the peace will come. But the question is, at what cost? In other words, how many lives will go and how much damage will be done? And will the land be capable of sustaining life again? I simply say here that I have every confidence that those of goodwill in this region, and all of us are, want peace, In fact, let me say that CARICOM has been adamant in indicating that it supports Guyana 150%, and that peaceful resolution, in our view, is the continued passage through the International Court of Justice. But we are also sanguine enough to know that just because we say so doesn't mean it shall be so. And therefore, we are human beings capable of statecraft and capable of much. And we need now to stretch every sinew in our body to ensure that the people of this region do not join the list in the rest of the world that are seeing war and disruption.
Agree, and I want to wish you all the best because it's going to be
Thank
a difficult time.
And it's going to be a lengthy process. So don't believe that anything is going to be resolved just overnight like that.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question before we close the Q&A session. Ms. Nichols.
Hi, Honourable Prime Minister, it's indeed an honour to be here, and thank you so much for what you've said. I receive it, it was well executed, and I understood, even though just being an entrepreneur and not in the political arena. But what I want to say is that what we're dealing with is beyond every person in this room. The challenges we face are insurmountable from a natural level, and they're things that we have to do and go deeper, and we need prayer. I'm a person of prayer. I love to pray, I love to talk to God. And I know that where we're at, He's the one who will help us. And the peace that we need in the region, as we cry out to Him, He responds. And so I pray that you will have great wisdom and insight as you go tomorrow. God bless.
Thank you. As Prime Minister Gonzalez said, we pray for the wisdom of Solomon, we pray for the patience of Job, and we pray for the vision of the old prophets. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, Prime Minister, we close the
I saw something about the plans for the airport. You want me to answer that very quickly? Yes.
I'm showing her too much, right? So she can see all the questions. Go for it, Prime
Bottom
Minister.
line is that we're deep into the discussions, and we would expect, Cabinet has been advised, that by the end of January, we hope we can finish the negotiations. I've seen some plans for the airport. They are amazing and functional at the same time. But I hope that we can see real progress, and we would have met with the investors as well recently. So I look forward to our being able to transition that. With respect to the Bridgetown port, we've also agreed, and in fact, Cabinet last week took the decision to have the enfranchisement of the workers and the NIS in the new holding company for the Bridgetown port, which will then free it up as well to then enter into a series of new things with respect to new SPVs with respect to different aspects of the expansion of the Bridgetown port. So I expect that both the airport and the seaport will be the subject of major continued expansion. And in the seaport's case, I ask us simply the question, do we believe that in the year 2023, that the port that Grantley built can be the port that carries us to 2070 or 2080? And if it is not, then you will understand that we're going to have to think outside of the box to see the expansion of the port and to retain the geographical advantage that Barbados had for the wrong reasons for 350 years, but needs to do for the right reasons going forward. Our geography has not changed. And when you look at the map, Barbados is more in line with Panama than even Jamaica or the Bahamas. You have to go north to Jamaica and north to the Bahamas. And Barbados is not only in line with Panama, Barbados is the closest then to also making sure that we reach Africa, which is going to be the largest market, one of the largest markets globally, with the demographic dividend that Africa is about to have, literally, where 1 in every 4 people in the world later in this century will come from the continent of Africa. So if we want to reposition this country, now is the time for us to do it with the investments that we make in the airport and the seaport to be that logistics hub that literally will compensate for our lack of population and will ensure that we can therefore leverage. The CSME is what gives us leverage to compensate for lack of population, but the logistics hub will also give us leverage to compensate for lack of population. So I expect that there will be opportunities for members of the Barbadian private sector as we go forward in how we reposition the country to be able to deal with this very, very critical area of logistics hubbing. Thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you for your questions, comments, and engagement. And we want to thank the Prime Minister again for graciousness and for engaging with us in a meaningful, practical, and direct way. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I want to, as I wish everyone a very happy Christmas and a better 2024, to ask us to truly reflect on what I said at the end, that it's not about talking anymore, it's about doing. And I ask in each and every one of you to make sure that the mission becomes relevant to each and every one of your employees. This is not esoteric. This is bread and butter, and this is about the future. And for those, P.S., Jordan, I know that we still had some books we can get to the chamber and the private sector, but equally, can you get to them the digital copy? Because the digital copy will help people. What we are now in the process of doing is drilling down to ensure that the individual policies and programs can meet the objectives of the mission. We're doing that in the government. The private sector will do it across all of its facets, and the labor movement as well. So thank you very much, and happy Christmas, better 2024.
All right, so just before